let's first and foremost focus on the 2 lunar missions. Right here on the front page it says, Roscosmos announces loss of Luna 25, India on course to be on lunar south pole, and funnily before Luna 25. People have been talking about, why are you comparing these 2 lunar modules? Luna 25 that has the Soyuz on the top, and the Soyuz has been the linchpin between the Earth and the Moon and the International Space Station as well. So Soyuz has been right up there, and let's not forget Soviet Union were the first to hit the Moon. But at the same time, carrying more load, having put in more budget, they launched way after Chandrayaan, and they were set to land today. But it seems like, unfortunately, they lost
well, it is
some
a
sort
complex
of, there was a glitch.
operation. It is
What
a very
exactly happened with the Luna 25?
The Roscosmos is quite, what I understand is that it had entered an orbit where it cannot control it. Basically, it looks like its on board computing went wrong when it came to orbital issues and to actually find out which orbit it should have been, and also probably the firing did not go the way it was planned, and that's why it went into an orbit around the Moon which cannot be controlled, as they say, and eventually the Moon's gravity would have sucked it in, and that's how the crash would have taken place on the lunar surface. So it could have been a technical glitch within the software of the entire system, and it's, Kabir was saying, it's a coordination of different instruments. It's a coordination from Earth to the Moon, literally. Because you're looking at
and
firing,
there's a delay over there as well.
Delay, I mean, there are seconds of delay also in that, but then at the same time you expect all these softwares to work perfectly for some kind of proper landing to take place. But it is not to be disheartened, because there is a kind of a statistic saying that when you look at the Moon, the landings that you're looking at is especially probe landings is somewhere with a success rate of 70%. So you should give that 30% of failure happening. We did fail, with Chandrayaan 2 when we tried to land the rover.
Right.
So it's not an easy task because of the complexities involved, and it's a very complex situation. But the previous successes, when we talk about the lunar probes that the Russians have been sending, was in part of what we call as the USSR. Now that country does not exist, and therefore the kind of funding and technological leverage that they had back then when it comes to the Russians or the Soviet Space Agency. Of course, they were the first to send a satellite around, an artificial satellite around the Earth. They were the first to, in fact, send a man to space. So they have a lot of firsts, and probably, they are the first to, in fact, land a probe on the surface of Venus as well. From the whatever little we know about Venus comes from a Russian this thing. So I don't think so. We should take the Russian thing as a failure. It's just part of that, ever experiencing part of it. So it is going to be there. But when you're talking about the launch vehicle, of course, that workhorse has always been a rocket that has been improved upon, and it does prove its mettle because it did take this probe all the way to the Moon within 5 days. So it's not the problem with the launch vehicle. Probably it would have been with softwares and the requisite
they said it's
kind
a
of this
technical
thing.
glitch.
It's a technical glitch. So
they
it
said
could
it
be
was
that.
a technical glitch.
So
But
I think
right
I'm
here
waiting for more details to come out, because then we can actually find out what happened.
Somebody has done Amitabh Sinha has done an explained version on the Indian Express, the National Daily. It says what the Luna 25 crash tells us about Moon landings. Spacecraft touched down on the Moon in the 1960s. Why then are modern space agencies struggling with soft landing, with 4 missions failing in the past 4 years? So, I mean, that's again important to look here, Varghese, that, we started, our Moon missions back in the 1960s. What are we sitting at? About almost 50 plus years now? More than half a century later, why are modern space agencies still struggling with soft landing, with 4 missions failing in the past 4 years? There's a low success rate. There are some numbers that have been given here. It says 50 missions were sent by the erstwhile Soviet Union into the Moon, of which 28 involved landing on the lunar surface. Now, 50 missions were sent by the erstwhile Soviet Union, 28 involved landing on the lunar surface, 10 of the 20 had succeeded, highlighting the high rate of failure.
That's
which
what I
is
was
something
trying
that
to
you
say.
were talking about as well. Now, the future
they
of lunar
tasted
missions.
success with Luna 9.
The future of lunar missions. It says Luna 25 was just the resumption of the Russian interest in the moon. It was named to signify the continuation of the lunar series, which the then Soviet Union used to reach the moon 50 years ago. Luna 24, launched in 1976, was the last spacecraft to land on the moon's surface before lunar missions came to an abrupt halt and remained suspended for almost 2 decades. Russia has announced more lunar missions to follow Luna 25, at least 3 more in the series that are planned in this decade itself.
So, as I was saying, Luna 9 was the first success that they had, but then they have a series of failures as well. And it is not easy to land on another planet or a heavenly body. It's not easy at all. And the kind of, but what we would say is by the now we would have reached that technology which had, technically taken off those glitches. But unfortunately, in the 1970s, both the United States as well as, the Russians just realized how much it is bleeding their exchequer and decided to ensure, to end all kind of moon kind of, the US, of course, the crewed missions, and the Russians with regard to the probes that they were sending. So both of them just quickly ended it. But now, Kabir, there is another issue that has come up, is that everyone is having an ambition when it comes to Mars. So they want to try out new technologies that could be carried out for Mars missions especially, and where to test it better than a near heavenly body like the moon. So some of those technology demonstrators need to be tested, and that is why we see this renewed interest on the moon. And at the same time, the Chinese are the different group of people in all the spacefaring nations, because they are having a military cum civilian run space mission. And what is the aim of it? It is to ensure that you have a colony on the moon. That is, you have a manned
there are so many
presence on the moon.
Netflix, series that I remember I watched. I'm forgetting the name of it. It was about colonizing the moon. I mean, a comical take on colonizing the moon. The Times of India has done. The Times of India has done this really nicely. It says declining space power questioning. In 1957, the erstwhile USSR was the first to launch a satellite to orbit the Earth, Sputnik 1, and Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first man to travel into space in 1961. His picture photograph still in large frame, placed at the International Space Station as well. Space missions have been delayed. Over the past 3 decades, Russia has considered various missions which were delayed or shelved. Oriole, a modern replacement for the Soyuz capsule, is likely to make its maiden flight in 2028. And in 2020, back in 2020, Roscosmos had said that the maiden flight would take place in 2023, this year, but now that has been shelved or delayed. There's another column on Vanity and Graph. Take a look at this. Scientists say Russian space program has been weakened by poor managers keen on unrealistic vanity space projects and corruption. They also blame it on the decline in the rigor of post-Soviet scientific education system. Failure of 2011 Phobos grunt mission to one of Mars's moons underscored the challenges. It could not even exit Earth's orbit and fell back to Earth into the Pacific in the year 2012. War and sanctions. Let's not forget, ladies and gentlemen, more than a years-long war with Ukraine, Western sanctions. For the longest time, it was Russia versus the West, not rest, but West. Failure comes as Russia's $2 trillion economy faces its biggest external challenge for decades, pressure of both Western sanctions and fighting the biggest land war in Europe since World War II. And media downplays. Russian state television put the news of Luna 25 loss at number 8 in its lineup at noon and gave it just 26 seconds of coverage. There's another Chinese angle here, ladies and gentlemen. Then we'll move on to Chandrayaan, what's happening with our own little baby up there. Treacherous mission. China is the only country to have landed on the moon successfully this century, 3 times. Most recently in December 2020. 3 other missions have crashed, landed in recent years. Most recently an attempt by iSpace, a Japanese company. Its Hakuto R mission, 1 lander crashed in April when a software glitch led the vehicle to misjudge its altitude. But the bigger question is, we attempted this in 1960, Varghese. 1960, 50 plus years.
I mean, the technology then, no, I'm saying that the technology then did not have that kind of, the memory power to actually carry on with the kind of computations that we can carry right now. But still, no matter how much we've advanced, we've still not mastered space journey and sending a probe to the moon. But still, we are making that progress. And I think right now the moon will be the staging ground